Alright, let's talk about Treefolk and Dryads in Magic. So, Treefolk and Dryads are surprisingly not very common across the multiverse or in Magic sets. There's only somewhere around 100 Treefolk in the game and around 50 Dryads. On Dominaria, forests are especially magical, so we have a lot of Treefolk and Dryad that come out of that. A lot of the early ones we see are from places like Argoth, which is the island that Urza blew up, or the major forests of Llanowar and Yavimaya. One of the big ones on Dominaria are the Magnagoth Treefolk, and these are the mangrove-like trees that live in Yavimaya. They're also enormous. They're over 100 feet tall. You can see for scale here, this is the foot of one of them. And you can see how tiny some of those Phyrexians are in the background and how big that guy in the distance is. This is also where like half our Treefolk legends come from. One is Vertaloth the Ancient, who is a Magnagoth Treefolk who fought in the Phyrexian invasion. The other is Namada, who has two different cards, and he is the guardian of the prison of the Primeval Rith. Primeval Dragon Rith, I should say. As for Dryads, we see a lot of them on Dominaria. There isn't really a consistent shape or style to them, with many of them appearing very elf-like. They look a lot like elves, but with like green grassy hair and like leaves for clothes. And we sort of see that visual repeated more to a greater or lesser extent. Mirrodin oddly has Dryads, but they are Dryads for these metal trees, and it raises a lot of questions about the nature of a Dryad that are just never explained. Lorwyn is a big plane for Treefolk. There are a bunch of different Treefolk on Lorwyn that have different characteristics. There's the Ash, the Birch, Black Poplar, Blackthorn, Elder, Oak, Rowan, and Yew. Red Yew specifically. And these all have different characteristics. Oaks are the biggest. Ashes tend to be the warriors and druids. Poplars have these regenerative powers. But most important is the Yew, because Kolfanor, the last Yew, is a major character in the original Lorwyn block. Basically, he's the only creature on Lorwyn who knows what Una is up to with the Aurora, and he's determined to stop her. And his sapling survives him in order to finally help defeat Una, although she dies at the end. Then we've got Doran, who is a black poplar who is known for his unique fighting skill. There's not really a lot of lore on Doran. Innistrad has Treefolk, but they generally fall into a more horror-y vibe, as befits the plane. Sometimes even with like zombies trapped inside them. And Innistrad's Dryads also tend to fall into the more creepy side of the lore. Ravnica's Dryads are pretty much all in the Selesnya. Their patron god, Mat Selesnya, who is the world soul of the plane, was said to be a group of Dryads that fused together and became like this elemental god. And until recently, they've been led by a group of Dryads. Theros doesn't really have much in the way of Treefolk. The ones they do are sort of like warped by the gods. They do, however, have Dryads, including male Dryads, and they fall into the category of Nymph here, which are these sort of monocolor-aligned servants of the gods. Ixalan has Dryads that are sort of these wardens of the forest, of the jungles. And while we don't know much about Kylums, we know they also have Dryads, at least one of whom participates in the games at Valor's Reach. And we know Arcavios, where Strixhaven is home to both Treefolk and Dryads, because we have Eudora, who is a Treefolk who works at the school, as well as Willow Dusk, and Dina, who are both members of the Witherbloom School. A few last examples real quick. We have the Rootless Yew from Kaldheim, which we don't know much about it. The legendary Kerbis from Innistrad, which I forgot to mention earlier. We don't really know anything about Kerbis other than he seems to be a Halloween Treefolk, going with the Harvesttide Festival. We also know that Moag is big on both Treefolk and Dryads. Moag, if you don't know, is an old school magic plane. It's a place where Urza tried originally to bring together a force to fight Phyrexia, and he wasn't able to unite anyone on the plane against them. We also know Eldraine has Treefolk, but we don't know much about them, as does Duskmourn, which fall into the sort of Evil Dead or I think Poltergeist maybe. One of those other horror movies also has like evil possessed trees. And that's pretty much everything we know. They're not Treefolk and Dryads are not very common in the multiverse. Their biggest places for them both are like Dominaria, Lorwyn, and Strixhaven. And even then, Lorwyn doesn't have Dryads. If you have more topics you want me to cover, let me know.